Ask a Seminarian. Hello and welcome to another Ask a Seminarian podcast. So today's question, where is God, can be taken a lot of different ways. It can almost be said, throwing your hands up in the midst of pain and struggle. Where is God in the midst of all of this? It can be said, where is God in the midst of our daily lives and our hustle and bustle? Where is God in our lives? Are we including Him? Are we praying to Him and including making sure that we're having a relationship with Him? And on a more kind of practical aspect, it can be like, where is God? Obviously the stereotypical image of the old guy in the clouds is incorrect. God is invisible. And where is He? He's all around us. He's outside of the universe. So where is God in a practical sense? And so it's really kind of the second and third points of these that I want to talk about today in terms of where is God. And don't worry, the first point we will certainly have, I'm sure, plenty of episodes to talk about as well. Okay, so where is God? As Christianity points out, God is everywhere. He is all around us and intensely close to us at all times. He is with us through every moment of our day, from when we wake up and go to bed and every point in between. But at the same time, God is entirely other, and the definition of otherworldly. There's no way we can possibly comprehend His infiniteness and greatness, and He is outside of all of time and space and everything that we know, and He is unfathomable in that way. And so it's both of these things that speak to two really important characteristics in understanding where is God. And one is, they're called His imminence and God's transcendence. So God's imminence speaks to essentially God being intensely close and personal and all around us through every moment of the day. So God's imminence is His accessibility that we have and His closeness with us and our ability to be in relationship with Him. And at the same time, God's transcendence speaks to His otherworldliness, His greatness, and how we cannot even begin to fathom that. And it's both of these aspects of God that are so critical to account for in knowing where God is. So both His immanence and His transcendence. Because focusing on one or the other of these can result in some really bad theology or misunderstandings about God. For example, if we focus only on God's transcendence, we end up with something called deism. So that's a view where it believes, yes, God exists, but He is this only entirely other being that is, outside of time and space, and maybe He created the universe and got things rolling, but that's it. He sort of stepped back and is no longer involved, and is not available to us. On the other hand, focusing entirely on imminence leads to something called Pantheism, where all of a sudden everything becomes God. So, for example, God is all around us and in everything. And so God is in this furniture, this microphone, or in animals and plants and everything around us. And so God becomes immensely accessible and here, but He doesn't transcend anything. And so balancing and understanding, seeing the importance of both God's transcendence and immanence is critical to have a Christian understanding of where God is. And that sort of leads to the idea of the importance of the both and of Christianity. So G.K. Chesterton talks about how Christianity hates pink. When we have two important ideas that seem like they're held in tension or opposition, the important thing is not to mix them together and to muddle them up. If we have something that's red and white, we need to fully understand and appreciate their redness and whiteness and not mix them together into some bland pink. That's just kind of a mix of the two, but that doesn't result in good theology or understanding of God. And so Christianity hates pink, but we need to understand the fullness of red and white. And so, for example, Christianity is full of these things like God's transcendence and immanence, Jesus' divinity and humanity, God's infinite justice and His mercy, humans being good and bad. So humans are good because we're made in the image and likeness of God, and bad because we're fallen and we're sinful. So understanding both of those things. The importance of the church's unity and diversity. And so our lives as Christians live in the paradoxical. So essentially, paradox is something that looks like two things that look like they're in contradiction to one another, but in reality, when you go deeper, they're complementary to one another. And so what might look like a paradox to us, or like how do you make sense of these things, are one and the same to God. And so one way that I really like to think about this, and I think explains it well, is that all things that come from God, it's like God's light is like white light. And all things that come from God are one and the same through his simplicity. You know, it is fully just, fully merciful, fully good, fully true, fully beautiful. All those things are one and the same. And all of that is like God's white light. But when it comes to us, in our limited understanding, in our temporal existence in time and space, it gets fractured like it does and refracted through a prism. And it's presented to us like all of these different colors of the rainbow and all the light that we're seeing. So that God's white light, where everything is unified in one and the same, God's justice and mercy, goodness, truth, and beauty are refracted and look like separate colors in a rainbow. And so justice may be over here and mercy is here. And to us, it looks, how do we balance those things? But to God, they are one and the same. And I think that's a really good idea in understanding how we, in our limited understanding, can understand God and see his white light, so his light reflected in the experience that we have and we're constantly living in. So something else that I wanted to talk about and bring up in terms of this is that anytime you encounter something good and true and beautiful, it's pointing to God. It doesn't matter where it is or where you come into where you encounter it. It is something that points to God and is a reflection of God, because all that is good and true and beautiful comes from God. Now, those good and beautiful and true things aren't God, because God transcends and supersedes them. But anytime you come across something that is beautiful, know that it's reflecting something of God's beauty, or something good or true. It reflects God's goodness and truth. And so one of the things that I've been trying to do and reflect on more is look at where the seeds of the word are, where God is in our culture and our daily lives today. And so taking a step back and reflecting, anytime you're reading a book or watching a movie or a TV show or listening to music, stepping back, and if you experience something profound or beautiful, reflect on that and know that that's pointing to God. And so where is it? What about that do you see reflected in God? And so I invite everyone who's listening to this to keep a vigilant heart and eyes open to look at those things and to reflect on, where do you see God and where do you see the message of Christianity in our society today, in nature, and all these different things that you can encounter, because it all comes from God, and we just have to keep our heart vigilant and our eyes open to see those things. And so essentially just a kind of brief preview. I wanted this as a kind of intro episode. Hopefully this is a little bit shorter one too, which is great. But to kind of open or introduce this idea, because I'm hoping to have subsequent podcasts where we dive into things within the pop culture, where we can look at where is God in this particular book or movie or music or so on and so forth, and look at where the goodness and truth and beauty of those things is pointing to the story of Christianity and God's truth, beauty, and goodness, because all of those things are one from God, and that we can see as we experience and go through our lives, as long as we keep our eyes and our hearts open. All right. So with that, I just want to thank you again for listening. Again, if you have a question that you would like us to talk about on the podcast, please feel free to submit those to the church office, and we'll be happy to talk about those. All right. So from all of us here at SUMC and the Ask a Seminarian podcast, God bless.